Therefore, we're going to give you a crash course in Fire Science 101 throughout the beginning of our talk. Spontaneous combustion is what we're dealing with this afternoon for the next hour or so. It is the ignition of a body by the internal development of heat without the application of fire. All remember that from junior high school? Okay, excellent. Spontaneous combustion fires are among the most difficult for the fire service industry to investigate because what happens? The evidence at the fire scene is consumed by the very thing that is going to be investigated. So spontaneous fires are very challenging for the fire service community to investigate. Some of the cases that we're going to be sharing with you this afternoon are even more challenging to investigate, and we'll explain why. One thing you need to know, we're going to reiterate this repeatedly because it is such an important point. When you deal with cases of diagnostic signs of spontaneous ignition, the thing that firefighters will most look for is the presence of more fire damage in the middle of the material mass that's been burned than around the edges of that. That to them suggests that we're dealing with, or they are dealing with, something that is internal in origin, a spontaneous ignition of fire. What are some things that can spontaneously combust? Grain silos would spontaneously burst into flame? Absolutely, yep. Here's a list of some of the things that fire scientists generally acknowledge. You get piles of damp compost and hay, that's been discussed. We live near the farm show in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. After every farm show week, they pull out the manure and the hay, and you can watch it smolder, for days until they bulldoze it out of the area. Sawdust, the lady up front mentioned coal. Pyrites, certain pyrophoric metals. We love this one, pistachio nuts. Did you know that pistachio nuts can spawn calm? They can. And ambergris from the gut of a whale will ignite when in contact with air. Lots of other things. What do the experts in fire service have to say when you inject human in between the words spontaneous and combustion? They first say it's an extraordinary but alleged phenomenon of the body being reduced to ash without the direct application of fire. Said to have occurred in the aged and in persons who were fat and hard drinkers. Anybody qualify? But most chemists reject the theory and altogether discredit it. Boy, is that true. Perchance then you've seen or heard about SponCom perhaps in cartoons. Sophie is saved by spontaneous combustion in the midst of a boring date. In supermarket tabloids such as this one and the ones on the screen. For many people, particularly those in the fire service and in the medical industries, it is very scary. We love this quote from Arthur C. Clarke at one of the shows that we did with him. There's one mystery I'm asked about more than any other: spontaneous human combustion. If there's anything more to SHC, I simply don't want to know about it. Before proceeding further, as we said, we're going to give you a crash course in Fire Science 101 because you really need to understand background of some basic fire theory in order to appreciate, we hope, what we're going to be sharing with you for the next several minutes. We already know that there are no firefighters in the room, so here we go. Anyone know what a first-degree burn is? Well, we already popped it up. It's reddening of the epidermis. It's a mild sunburn. What's a second-degree burn? Blister. Perfect. Excellent. Third-degree burn? Charring, yep. Scarring, nerve damage done by the flame. When we began our research back in the 70s, that's where the category of burn injury stopped at third degree. Now they've added a fourth degree burn. Anyone know what that is? Internal? No, not internal. Destruction of the skin? That would be third degree or second degree. Fourth degree burn is the most severe category of burn injury. It's when there's charring done to the underlying skin and muscle tissue. In other words, a deep burn penetrating into the body. That's fourth degree burn. The human body, in case you don't know, is incredibly difficult to burn. Well, anyway. Your body is about 70 to 75% water. And the reason firefighters like water is because it lowers the heat of combustion and puts fires out. People who investigate fires and are forensic anthropologists, for example, almost to a person will tell you that even in the most severe fourth degree burns, internal organs are left intact. These are two photographs of typical severe fourth degree burn injuries. You can still see that This is a human being. Here's the head, here's the shoulders, here's the torso, there's a leg. This is a person who was burned inside a car trunk, and you can still identify this person as having been human. Now the body's pretty much intact. It can be hauled off to a morgue and autopsied. Here's Elizabeth Morey. She's a forensic anthropologist. Again, she asserts that the internal organs are all in place in the work that she's done in her medical career. What's it take to cremate a body? It takes a lot. It takes a lot of equipment, and starting with that big hefty thing on the left, which is the crematorium oven or the retort. You need a cremulator, which is this device here, so that what is raked out of the retort is put in the cremulator so that the bone fragments are mechanically ground to powder to be given to the next of kin. You need all this other fancy stuff. You need a lift table to put the coffin and the customer, if you will, into the retort and take it back out. And you need a vacuum cleaner to clean up the ashes that get away. You need filters. You need 40 to 50 gallons of fuel oil or a million or so cubic feet of natural gas. And you need several hours at temperatures that can go as high as 22 to 2400 degrees Fahrenheit in that retort to cremate a body to bone fragment, to pieces. That's a high temperature. Molten lava, rock that has melted coming out of a volcano, is 2000 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're talking temperatures hotter than lava flows. Obviously, the authorities don't want to deal with the concept of spontaneous human combustion. Dr. Smith and Fittis say this: spontaneous combustion of the human body cannot occur and no good purpose can be served by discussing it. Dr. Adelson says, here's a medical examiner in Cuyahoga County to whom we spoke several years ago, I do not for a single second buy the overheated concept of spontaneous human combustion. The evidence that we're going to show you this afternoon, he called hoaxes. He said, bodies don't burn this way. Photographs that purport to depict that are simply hoaxes. Dr. Adelson, in the report that he wrote up about the non-existence of SponCom, never once investigated a single case that fit the criteria and the definition of SponCom. How do we know that? We asked him. He told us. Here's a gentleman some of you will recognize, Joe Nickel, our nemesis. Spontaneous human combustion cases continue to spark controversy, so to speak, largely due to the efforts of non-scientists, yours truly, and journalists. We can dismiss the concept out of line. John DeHaan is a recognized consulting criminalist in this country. He earns big bucks consulting about fires. He speaks of the mythology of spontaneous human combustion. Clearly, he does not concur in its existence. Elaine Pope, the Dame of Flame, used to work out at Arkansas. She has done experiments burning up cadavers under scientific conditions to find out how crime scenes that involve fire, arson murders, for example, can best be unraveled to find the evidence for the clues to the crime itself. In her repeated experiments, she finds that always there is a permanent record in the bones of criminal intent. That means bones are left behind. They can be studied, they can be analyzed. You can conduct forensics on them, good CSI stuff. We could fill up the rest of our time slot with quotes like that. We're going to leave you with one more because it is really, really important. Dr. Mark Benecki is another criminalist. He teaches in New York and in Germany, internationally renowned. He says, in forensic practice, there are no, emphasis on no, known cases in which internal organs of a burned corpse were damaged more severely than the outer parts. Charles Fort, however, was interested in fires too. He said, one reads of hundreds of accounts of fires, and many of them are mysterious. But one's ruling thought is that the unexplained would be renderable in terms of accidents, carelessness, or arson, if one knew all the circumstances. But keep in mind the subject, as in every other field of phenomena, one comes upon cases that are irreconcilable. Because we see so many new faces here, we're going to run you very quickly through some of the cases that have brought us to the conclusion that we have reached about the merits of the concept of spontaneous human combustion, and then we'll go beyond. The warning is, this material is graphic. It's intended only for audiences who have sturdy stomachs, an inquisitive mind, and a sense of wonder. We cannot speak to your stomachs, but the fact that you all are here means that you meet, as far as we're concerned, the second and third criteria. Agreed?
Agreed.
Let's have it. All right. The case that introduced us to the subject we read about in junior high school in a book by Frank Edwards called Stranger Than Science. He had a title in the book called Incredible Cremations. And in that chapter was a recounting of what happened to Mary Weiser in 1951 in St. Pete, Florida. If tombstones could talk, some of them would have incredible tales to tell. Mrs. Weiser's red granite monolith, which is located about 15 miles from our office outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, would have one of the most incredible tales to tell. In 1951, she was living in St. Pete, Florida, planning to come back to Pennsylvania, her home state. On the morning of July 2, there was a fire in Mrs. Weiser's apartment, more specifically in Mrs. Weiser and the chair in which she was last known to be seated. Firefighters had to literally shovel up her remains. The fire was that severe in consuming Mrs. Weiser's body. She weighed about 175 pounds, by the way. Investigators started talking about a circle of fire, not much longer than or larger than 3 feet in diameter, in which she and her chair and an end table were almost wholly consumed. Very little other fire or heat damage was found in the apartment by the first responders. Taken to the morgue, this is what they shoveled out of her apartment. 1 foot, the satin slipper that had encased it, a few pieces of calcined vertebrae, and this ovoid mass up here at the far end of the morgue table, which at the time was identified by the first responders as being Mrs. Weiser's head, shrunken in size to an orange or a teacup. That, ladies and gentlemen, is not what is supposed to happen in a normal high heat fire fatality fire scene. Dr. Krogman, a world-renowned forensic anthropologist, was vacationing in St. Pete at the time, and he took a personal interest in this case. He found it perplexing, and he had done his own burn experiments on cadavers. He knew what was expected to happen to a body that's been burned under high heat. Mrs. Weiser seemed to belie everything that he knew up to that point about what happens in a fatal fire scene involving a human body. The extent of the reduction of her body mystified him. As we said, she weighed 175 pounds before the incident. Afterwards, they shoveled about 8 pounds of ash and rubble out of the fire. He marveled at the localization of the tremendous heat. He said in his experiments, only at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit had he seen bone melt, and yet that's what was found in Mrs. Weiser's apartment. The time frame available. These fires are supposed to be, it is alleged, long, slow temperature, smoldering fires. At most, Mrs. Weiser had 11 hours to consume herself as she was found. We suspect it was much less time than that. There was the absence of the noxious odor of burned flesh. In Mrs. Weiser's apartment, the first responders said the odor was that of a sweet smell. The shrunken skull we've already mentioned. And for Dr. Krogman, it was simply an affront to logic and common sense. He said the impossible is how he described what happened there. He said, if I had not seen this, I would not have believed it. It could not happen, but it did. He called the fire scene macabre beyond belief. We had the opportunity to interview 2 of the first responders who were involved at the time of the incident. Patrolman Tipton was on his first day of police duty, and he was stationed outside the premises to secure the scene for the investigators to do their work inside. He told us they didn't know what they had in there. The gentleman below was Nelson Aders. He was one of the 2 firemen who shoveled up Mrs. Weiser's ashes. He concluded that the woman died by spontaneous human combustion. Pretty bold statement for a firefighter to make. Let's go back. Remember Dr. Benecki? And the quick audio clip from Jerry Maguire, Show Me the Money. Our question to you is, and to Mr. Benecki, show me the organs. Mrs. Weiser's lungs were not to be found, her liver was not to be found, her pancreas was not to be found. So given Dr. Benecki's criteria for dismissing spontaneous human combustion, the fact that we don't have internal organs, but we do have an external body part, belies his negation of spontaneous human combustion, does it not? At least it does for us. Let's see what else we can find. The organs, as we said, are clearly not in the rubble that was placed on the morgue table in St. Pete. Mrs. Reeser's remains did come back to Pennsylvania, but not in the fashion that she anticipated returning to her home state. Okay, we've got 4th-degree burns, right? What happened to Mrs. Reeser far exceeds the criteria for a 4th-degree burn, which is why we have been advocating to Scotland Yard and all fire officials internationally that they develop a 5th-degree burn category injury to describe these whole body incineration cases, if and when they occur, and clearly at least in one case it occurred. Here's our definition of SPONCOM, a 5th-degree class burn. It's the blistering, smoking, or burning of flesh in the absence of a known identifiable nearby external burn agent. That is, no discernible contact with a flame, with caustic chemicals, with radioactive material, with high amperage electricity, or nearby radiant heat source. Those are the 5 criteria that firefighters look for at a fire scene to explain the fire. If you can rule those out, then we submit to you and to firefighters in general, they have to consider something else, what Charles Ford has called spontaneous combustion, the irreconcilables. Classic SPONCOM is when the body is nearly incinerated to ashes. We make that distinction, you'll find out why later. The second case that captivated our interest and really got us hooked into this subject was the flaming fate of Dr. John Irving Bentley, a retired old-time country-style physician who lived in Coudersport, Pennsylvania, in our home state, up by the northern tier of Pennsylvania with the New York State border. This is in Dr. Bentley's better-looking days. December 5, 1966, Dr. Bentley was living at 403 North Main Street in Potter County, in Coudersport in Potter County, the county seat of the county. It's a place where probably still to this day there are more deer than people. People tend to keep to themselves up there until the Marcellus shale drillers came in anyway. That aside, imagine for once that you're the gentleman in the upper left corner. This would be Don Gosnell. He's a meter reader for the gas company in Coudersport back in 1966. You're Don Gosnell today. You've laced on your work boots. It's a cold winter morning, lots of snow outside. Don your jacket, you get your gas meter book, leave your house, bid your wife goodbye. You're off to work. First stop on your round is Dr. Bentley's house. Knock on the front door, let yourself in. They don't lock doors up there in 1966. You go down the hallway of Dr. Bentley's apartment. There's a wispy, grayish blue smoke in the hallway. You don't think much of it. Smells sweet, a little odd, but what the heck. You go down to the basement, read the gas meter down there. On the earthen floor, you notice as you turn around, over in the corner of the floor is a pile of ash, 5 inches in height, 14 inches in diameter. You think to yourself, gee, something must have burned up here overnight. Wonder why we didn't get a fire call, because besides a meter reader, I'm a volunteer firefighter. He looks up to the ceiling of the basement and sees a hole about 2 by 3 feet in size, cherry red embers on its perimeter. Wonder what burned up. Why didn't we get a call? You go back upstairs. You're friendly. You want to say hi to Dr. Bentley on your Monday morning rounds. You knock on his door. No answer. His door's unlocked. You stick your head inside his 2-room apartment. You expect to see him sitting on a chair in his living room. Not to be found. You enter the apartment, stick your head around into the bathroom of Dr. Bentley, expecting to see the old gentleman there. What you find, or think you find, is instead this. What you think is the leg of a mannequin, and you first think to yourself, why does Dr. Bentley have a mannequin leg on his bathroom floor? And then you realize it's not a mannequin's leg. It's a human leg. And it's the leg that belonged to Dr. John Irving Bentley. The ashes in the basement that you had just kicked around with your work boot a few seconds earlier was the rest of Dr. Bentley. An incredibly localized fire scene. You run out of the house, down the hall, out of the house, down the street, into the gas company and yell, Dr. Bentley's burned up. It's the understatement of 1966. Localized fire scene, sweet smell. You tell your fellow firefighters when they arrive not to go in because it's just too disturbing. They don't believe you. Nobody could burn up like that. They go in. Yes, you can. The locals kept so quiet about this that Dr. Bentley's son did not know how his dad died until he saw us discussing this fire in 1980 on a program called That's Incredible. He's really tight-lipped about it up there. Dr. Bentley's death, because he was such a beloved county physician, country physician up in Coudersport, was front page headline news the following edition of the Enterprise. It talks about the charred body of Dr. Bentley and the surmise that he died in a smoldering fire. Well, the body is not charred, it's basically disintegrated. It's completely dehydrated, save for that leg. Did he drop a cigarette on himself? Did he drop his pipe on his lap? That was surmised. But Dr. Bentley, being a pipe smoker, and you have theoretically an external ignition source here, the pipe was found in its holder on a stand next to Dr. Bentley's chair in the living room. Now, if he dropped a pipe on his lap and ignited his bathrobe, would you reach down in your lap, pick up the pipe, put it neatly in its holder, then get up and use that aluminum walker to take 5 minutes to hobble to the bathroom in search of water to put out your burning robe? We don't think you would. We do not believe Dr. Bentley did that. He was infirm. His nurse told us it took him 5 minutes to get from his sitting chair over to the bathroom, but he was sound of mind. He would have known what to do if he had found himself in flaming garments. We got Dr. Bentley's death certificate, an official legal documentation supposed to tell the truth. What do we see in Dr. Bentley's death certificate? He died by asphyxiation and 90% burning of body. What do you need to determine asphyxiation, folks? Lungs. You need lungs or you need a trachea, neither of which existed. 1986, I think this was the last case that we shared at Fort Fest. We had just come back recently from investigating it. Upstate New York, up in the Adirondacks, outside Ticonderoga, a little hamlet called Crown Point. March of that year, George Irving Mott, retired firefighter, lived in this 20 by 40 foot tinderbox of a structure out in the country, well away from nearby neighbors. His son Kendall showed up late March one afternoon because family members had not heard from him in a day and a half. Knocked on the door but realized something was amiss and refused to walk into the home of his dad. Called a neighbor who did go in, and the next thing that happened was the fire department was being called. This is an incredibly complicated case. We have no time to go into the details. One of the info journals in the back by the entry door has our cover article on the investigation that we did with George Irving Mott. It's an amazing fire scene. We call this photo Find the Body Part. Can anybody find the body part? It's here. This is George Mott's bedroom at the far end of the home. Elbow here? No, up here? To the right. Down. To the right. Right there. That's a good guess, but it's not correct. We've shown this with firemen. Firefighters can't find it, so we're just going to give you exactly where it is. What George Mott left behind was one half of one leg. Gee, where have we seen that before? Lying on the bed. Here's where the knee should be. Here's the lower leg. Here are the toes. Okay. Left leg non-existent. At the other end of the bed was his head. Guess what? According to the medical examiner, the coroner whom we interviewed, about this size. The leg aside, everything that was shoveled out of George Mott's bedroom could be put in a shoebox. You cannot put a normal-sized human head in a normal-sized shoebox. Head's too big. To do that, the head had to have shrunken, just like it apparently did in the Reeser case. Not supposed to happen. We were at this fire scene. The ceiling is here. We could stand in George Mott's bedroom and touch the ceiling. There was not a scorch mark on it. Our critics say, Larry, you don't understand. Radiant heat around a burning object doesn't transmit laterally very well. You should not expect to see surrounding combustibles ignited. But heat rises, doesn't it? We should expect to see, as you will see later, some indication of heat damage overhead, where George Mott burned through his bed, through the flooring, and into the crawl space below. No ceiling damage whatsoever above the bed. Mark Benecke. SHC can't happen because internal organs are always left intact. Not in the Mott case. Back to Pennsylvania, 1964, Helen Conway. We attend an advanced arson fire science course at the Pennsylvania Fire Academy, and the instructor, Buzz Trebold, told the class at the end of his instruction period that he had a photograph that some people say is spontaneous human combustion. He said it involved a lady sitting in a chair. And we're thinking, shit, that's Mrs. Reeser. We're starting to talk to the firemen around us, and yeah, this happened in 1951, yada, 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 until the photograph got past our hands. And we knew immediately that this was not the Reeser fire scene. This was a case that we knew nothing about. So we rushed up afterwards to Buzz Trebold and said, who, when, where, we want to track this down. Sounds like something that we should be researching to try to figure out how these fires happen. He didn't know other than it happened somewhere in southeastern Pennsylvania. That's Philadelphia, folks, the most populous part of our state. No date, no name. How are we going to track this down? 9 months later, we tracked it down. We were able to do so because we talked to, we were interviewing Dr. Krogman at the time about his involvement with Reeser. He was happy to talk to us about his work with Elliot Ness, the G-men back in the 30s, but he didn't want to talk about the Reeser case. When he finally broke down and started to discuss it with us, he said, Arnold, I can tell you how Mrs. Reeser burned. She dropped a cigarette on her lap, died in a chair fire. Imagine us picking our jaw up off the floor, because that belied everything that Dr. Krogman had written about the case when he investigated it the first time back in '51. It's interesting to us how time can change perceptions of facts. Anyway, Krogman happened to have got a communication about this strange case in southeastern Pennsylvania that turned out to match the photographs we'd seen at the Fire Academy, and that's how we learned about Helen Conway. Helen Conway was 49 years old on November 8th, 1964. She never made it to her next birthday. A passerby noticed some bright light and some smoke coming out of a second floor window, knocked on the door. Stephanie, Mrs. Conway's granddaughter, had just visited her grandmother upstairs a few minutes earlier. Fire department arrived within minutes to find this fire scene when they ejected the smoke. In a corner of the second floor sitting room was the remains of Helen Conway. Obviously 2 lower human legs, a brass bell that she used to summon assistance, an intact telephone, evidence of very high heat scalding on the wall behind the chair, and not much else. This case, no odor of burned flesh whatsoever, the first responders told us. Just what happened to Helen Conway? One of the most significant things about the Conway case is the time element, and make sure we mention that to you in the end. This really perplexed the local fire investigators, and this is Chief Paul Hagerty, the fire chief for Upper Darby Township. Let's hear what he has to say. He was there. We should value what he has to say. If we can hear it.
Mrs. Conway is on the left, and on the right is a man who poured gas over himself and set himself on fire. That is third-degree burns. Mrs. Conway is consumed. It's not third-degree burns. There's no body there, there's no skin there that says third-degree burn. This is third-degree burns. I think Kelly Conway died of spontaneous human combustions.
Astounding. A second firefighter acknowledges in his mind the possibility of spontaneous human combustion. But we in officialdom will have nothing to do with that. It's a myth. It's superstition. It's medieval relic of ignorance. Sponcom simply doesn't happen. So how do they explain what happened to Mrs. Conway and Mrs. Reeser and Dr. Bentley? They like to invoke the human candle wick theory. You add an external ignition source, match, candle, cigarette, and a human being, and supposedly you will get Helen Conway, who, by the way, burned to the extent that she did in no more than 21 minutes. Every first responder we interviewed who was at the fire scene affirms that. They will not go 30 minutes. They say 21 minutes max. However, 21 minutes represents the time that the fire call had to come in. Firefighters responded. Bob Meslin, the fire photographer who took these photographs that we're sharing with you, went home, got his camera, returned, they ejected the smoke, and then he took 12 photographs. That covers 21 minutes. Subtract the time that it took Bob Meslin to do all that, we're down to 6 minutes maximum. Nobody that we've interviewed in 40 years of investigating fire can explain to us how Mrs. Conway, how anyone, even of doused in accelerants, can be consumed to that extent in 6 minutes, not even in 21 minutes. So, we think we have a puzzle here. What do you think? We backtracked, as we said, back to Oklahoma City for our third investigation of this road tour into freakish fires. Stopped by the Oklahoma Capitol building, very impressive. A couple miles away, there's apartment complex, one of the rear units. The groundskeeper and a colleague were walking by this very spot on October 1st, 2012, and they looked up to this area and saw sitting in a chair very much like this one, Ms. Vicky L. Gascott. But she wasn't just sitting there, she was sitting there engulfed in fire. The groundskeeper and his colleague, of course, were horrified. They yelled up at her saying, "We're coming up to rescue you. You know, we'll break in if we have to, meet us at the door." They went up to the apartment, exterior door, knocked on it. Vicky opened the door for them, engulfed in fire. She sat down on the sofa while they called the emergency responders, engulfed in fire. She subsequently made her transition in the hospital. We have this information based on testimony, interviews that we conducted extensively with her family members. They're trying to figure out how this could happen. So are we. Any thoughts? Talk to us afterwards. More recently, also last year in India, you may have heard about baby Rahul Kannan, said to be a human torch who caught fire 9 days of age, according to his mother. And over the next, I think, month and a half, supposedly spontaneously burned 3 more times. We won't go into the details. We do not have an assessment of this case. It's still up in the air as far as our research is concerned. Was he the victim of child abuse? Did he burn due to the human wick effect? Mm-hmm. Were there environmental contaminants in the area? This has been suggested. Or was it spontaneous human combustion? If so, baby Rahul will be the youngest in our database, superseding a 6-week-old toddler that we have from England several years back. We're going to wrap up with this, or try to. We did a show recently for the Unexplained Files that covered our investigation of the Van Zandt case, but also brought to the public's awareness something else that is utterly fascinating and just absolutely an affront to the SponCom naysayers. If you haven't seen it, here we go.
For Arnold, the wick effect doesn't offer a plausible explanation for these mysterious deaths. And there's something even more remarkable about this phenomenon. Some have actually lived to tell the tale of what happened to them. Frank Baker is a decorated Vietnam War veteran with 2 Purple Hearts and a medal for gallantry. But his most terrifying brush with death was not on any battlefield. It was in Vermont in June of 1985.
Well, we were getting ready for fishing. We were sitting on the couch the day before the Derby. Everything was great. Pete was sitting next to me. We were having one hell of a time. And all of a sudden,
it was the damnedest thing I've ever seen. Frank was freaking out and making me freak out.
I was in sheer panic. All I could do was try to fight it. I was petrified. I had no idea what was taking place in my body. None.
Pete and Frank managed to extinguish the flames and get to a doctor.
The doctor was completely baffled, and he said, looking at it, Frank, this burned from the inside out. And he said, I've never, ever seen anything like this.
Frank was nowhere near any source of heat or flame.
It wasn't smoking, there were no flames around, there was no lights on, no microwaves. All that was coming in was the sun from the far end of the house when this happened.
Frank's story doesn't end there. It's happened more than once.
We were going fishing. Everything was great. And then all of a sudden I started screaming at the top of my lungs. My arms were just on fire.
Once more, Pete manages to put out the flames and save Frank's life.
I ain't never seen anything in my lifetime such as the things I see that happen to Frank.
Another understatement.
Today, years later, the damage to his skin is largely healed.
The scarring has had 15 years to heal, and it's just settled back down.
But the psychological scars remain.
I have no doubt that in the future, or at any time, this could happen again.
What if you're out in a boat fishing with your friend and that happened to you? What would you do?
Jump in the water.
Jump in the water? Might help, might not. There's a new theory put out by Professor Brian Ford last year, who claims that the body produces acetone, and acetone becomes the fuel in the body that, if sparked externally, will cause the types of fires that we've shown to you this afternoon. This is acetone. You probably know that it's highly flammable. But in the experiments that Professor Ford has done, he soaks his sliver of meat tissue in 100% acetone, wraps it in acetone-soaked fabric, and then ignites it externally, produces actually a pretty good blaze. I wish we had time to show you the video of it because it's absolutely ludicrous. It's as silly as what John DeHaan did in his burn chamber. It's a good theory, it doesn't work. Flashing back real fast to the Van Zandt case, we have the medical examiner's autopsy report. Cause of death, natural. Natural as in not criminal, yes. Other than that, very much not natural. Case after case where internal organs do not exist, but external body parts do. Ford talked about the damned not staying damned. People are going to continue to suffer this fate, we suggest to you, until science opens up its minds and looks at the evidence that we and others have pulled together and grapples with what we believe is a truly profound Fortean phenomenon. If you want to know more, check us out at the Rear Table. The book's available. See us for the rest of the conference. Ask questions, throw ideas. We brought along a smoke detector from one of the cases. If Joe or anybody who wants to psychometrize this and help us understand what happened at least one of those fire scenes, come see us during the week. Thank you for your rapt attention. Hope it hasn't been too horrifying. And if there's time for questions, probably not. We'll field them. It's your call, Susan.
We can.
You can? Okay. Thank you very much.